Millionaire CEO pretends to be rideshare driver, but the intriguing passenger has secrets of her own. Hello, welcome. Leave a like, subscribe, activate notifications, and enjoy this story. He had everything: the penthouse, the power, the perfect life. But Ethan Williams, a millionaire CEO, couldn't escape the crushing emptiness that came with it. His empire was built on cold decisions, but behind every victory there was a cost he refused to acknowledge. Now, on the verge of losing the one thing money couldn't buy, his own family, Ethan takes a step no one would expect. He trades his luxury for a driver's seat, pretending to be a rideshare driver. What starts as an experiment in anonymity quickly spirals into something far more dangerous. On his first night driving, a woman steps into his car. She seems ordinary, but there's something in her eyes, a pain, a mystery, that Ethan can't ignore. The air thickens with tension as their conversation deepens. Who is she? And why does he feel like she knows more about him than she's letting on? As the ride continues, Ethan's carefully crafted world starts to unravel piece by piece. One ride, one passenger, will change everything. The secrets hidden between them are darker than anyone could have imagined. And as the truth inches closer, Ethan is forced to confront not only the woman in his back seat, but the very demons he's been running from all his life. This ride will take him to the edge where no amount of wealth or power can save him. The New York City skyline glittered like a constellation of dreams, but for Ethan Williams, it was nothing more than a gilded cage. From his penthouse office on the 87th floor, he gazed out at the city that never sleeps, feeling more isolated than ever. The weight of his success pressed down on him like a heavy shroud, suffocating the man he once was. His phone buzzed, shattering the silence. The caller ID flashed. Emma, daughter. Ethan's heart raced, a flicker of hope igniting in his chest. He answered, his voice uncharacteristically hesitant. Emma? Dad, Her voice was cold, distant. I can't do this anymore, don't call me again. The line went dead, leaving Ethan in stunned silence. He stared at his reflection in the floor-to-ceiling windows, barely recognizing the man looking back at him. Gone was the bright-eyed dreamer who had built Williams Enterprises from the ground up. In his place stood a hollow shell, a man who had sacrificed everything that truly mattered on the altar of corporate success. The sounds of celebration drifted up from the floor below, where his employees were toasting their latest multi-million-dollar deal. Ethan felt sick. Each cheer, each pop of champagne, was a reminder of the choices he'd made, the people he'd stepped on to reach the top. His mind flashed to faces, employees he'd laid off without a second thought, small business owners he'd crushed, families displaced by his ruthless expansion. Emma's words echoed in his mind. I can't do this anymore. Neither could he. In that moment, Ethan made a decision that would change everything. He pulled out his personal phone, hands shaking slightly as he downloaded a rideshare app. Within minutes, he was approved as a driver. It was madness, he knew. A Fortune 500 CEO moonlighting as a rideshare driver. But the thought of shedding his identity, even for a few hours, was intoxicating. He loosened his tie, feeling as if he could breathe for the first time in years. Ethan grabbed a worn baseball cap from his desk drawer, a relic from his college days, and headed for the elevator. As the doors closed, he caught a glimpse of his reflection. The hat cast a shadow over his face, obscuring the features that had graced so many magazine covers. For the first time in decades, Ethan Williams disappeared. The garage was empty this late at night. Ethan bypassed his usual spot, ignoring the sleek sports car that cost more than most people made in a year. Instead, he approached a nondescript sedan, the kind of car that blended into the background of city life. It had been an impulse purchase, a futile attempt to recapture some sense of normalcy. As he settled into the driver's seat, Ethan felt a surge of anxiety. What was he doing? This was madness. He was about to turn the key when his phone buzzed with a notification. His first ride request. Heart pounding, Ethan accepted the ride and pulled out of the garage. The streets of New York stretched before him, a labyrinth of possibilities. For the first time in years, he felt alive. Vulnerable, yes, but alive. He pulled up to the curb, double-checking the address. This was it. Ethan took a deep breath, steeling himself for whatever came next. The back door opened, and a woman slid into the seat. "Evening," Ethan said, his voice gruffer than usual. He glanced in the rearview mirror and their eyes met. Time seemed to stop. The woman was unremarkable at first glance. Mid-30s, dark hair pulled back in a messy bun, clothes that spoke of a long day at work. But her eyes, they were deep wells of emotion, filled with a mixture of exhaustion and something else. Something that made Ethan's breath catch in his throat. Recognition impossible, and yet, "Hi," she said, her voice soft but carrying an undercurrent of steel. "Thanks for picking me up so late." Ethan nodded, unable to shake the feeling that this woman somehow knew him. Not as Ethan Williams, CEO, but as something more, something deeper. "Where to?" he asked, trying to keep his voice steady. She gave an address in Brooklyn, and Ethan pulled away from the curb. As they merged into traffic, he couldn't help but steal glances at her in the mirror. She was staring out the window, lost in thought, but there was a tension in her body that spoke of barely contained emotion. Who was this woman? And why did Ethan feel like his carefully constructed world was about to come crashing down around him? As they drove through the neon-lit streets of Manhattan, Ethan's mind raced. He had embarked on this ridiculous adventure to escape his life, if only for a few hours. But now, with this mysterious passenger in his back seat, he felt like he was on the precipice of something monumental. The woman shifted in her seat and Ethan caught her eye in the mirror again. This time there was no mistaking the flash of recognition, but it was tinged with something else. Anger? Pain? Long night? Ethan asked, desperate to break the tension. She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "You could say that. Sometimes it feels like my whole life has been one long night." The words hit Ethan like a physical blow. He gripped the steering wheel tighter, knuckles turning white. There was something in her tone, a weight of experience that resonated with his own hidden pain. "I know the feeling," he murmured before he could stop himself. The woman leaned forward slightly, her gaze now fixed on Ethan. "Do you? You seem different from most drivers I've had." Ethan's heart raced. Had she seen through his disguise so quickly? "I'm just filling in for a friend," he lied, the words tasting bitter on his tongue. "Trying to understand. A different perspective." She sat back, a knowing smile playing at the corners of her mouth. Perspective is a funny thing, isn't it? One day you're on top of the world, and the next you're wondering if it was all worth it. Ethan finished, his voice barely above a whisper. The silence that followed was electric. Ethan felt exposed, raw, as if this stranger had peeled back all his layers with just a few words. He wanted to confess everything. His sins, his regrets, the crushing loneliness that had driven him to this moment. But before he could speak, the woman's phone buzzed. She glanced at it, her face hardening. "I'm sorry, I need to take this," she said, answering the call. Ethan tried not to eavesdrop, but fragments of the conversation drifted to the front seat. "Yes, I'm on my way now. No, he doesn't suspect anything. Trust me, by this time tomorrow, Ethan Williams won't know what hit him." The world seemed to tilt on its axis. Ethan's vision blurred, his ears ringing. He fought to keep the car steady as the implications of what he'd just heard crashed over him. This wasn't a chance encounter. This woman, this stranger who had seen through him so easily, was here for a reason. And whatever her plan was, it spelled disaster for Ethan Williams. As they approached her destination, Ethan's mind raced. Should he confront her, reveal his identity, or should he maintain his cover, try to learn more about her plans? The decision was taken out of his hands as they pulled up to a nondescript apartment building. The woman gathered her things, then paused, her hand on the door handle. "Thank you for the ride," she said, her voice soft but filled with an undercurrent of something, determination, regret. "And for the conversation. It's given me a lot to think about." Before Ethan could respond, she was gone, disappearing into the shadows of the building's entrance. He sat there, engine idling, feeling as if his entire world had just shifted on its axis. As he pulled away from the curb, Ethan knew one thing with absolute certainty. His life would never be the same again. The mask of anonymity he had donned for one night had cracked, revealing a truth he wasn't sure he was ready to face. But ready or not, the game was on. And Ethan Williams, for all his wealth and power, had never felt more vulnerable or more alive in his life. As Ethan merged back into traffic, his mind raced faster than the yellow cab zipping past. The encounter with the mysterious woman, Sarah, according to the app, had left him shaken to his core. He gripped the steering wheel tightly, his knuckles white against the worn leather. "Get it together, Williams," he muttered to himself, adjusting his baseball cap lower over his eyes. But try as he might, he couldn't shake the feeling that his carefully constructed world was about to come crashing down around him. His phone buzzed with another ride request. For a moment, Ethan considered turning it off, racing back to his penthouse and pretending this night had never happened. But something, curiosity, fear, or perhaps a desperate need for redemption, made him accept the ride. As he pulled up to the curb outside a trendy Williamsburg bar, Ethan's heart nearly stopped. There, stumbling slightly in impractical heels, was Sarah. She slid into the back seat before he could even process what was happening. "Well, hello again," she said, her voice slightly slurred but her eyes sharp as ever. "Fancy meeting you here." Ethan's throat went dry. Just a coincidence, I guess," he managed to stammer out. Sarah leaned forward, her breath warm against his ear. "I don't believe in coincidences, do you?" "Ethan?" The use of his real name sent a jolt of panic through him. He opened his mouth to deny it, to claim she had him confused with someone else, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, he met her gaze in the rearview mirror and saw a mixture of triumph and something else. Was it sympathy? "How did you know?" he asked quietly, all pretense falling away. Sarah sat back, a sad smile playing at the corners of her mouth. "Let's just say I've made it my business to know everything about Ethan Williams, the man who destroyed my family's legacy with the stroke of a pen." The words hit Ethan like a physical blow. His mind raced through past deals, trying to place her face, her name. I don't understand," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "No, you wouldn't, would you?" Sarah's tone was bitter now. "To you, we were just numbers on a spreadsheet, collateral damage in your quest for ever-increasing profits." As they drove through the neon-lit streets of Brooklyn, Sarah began to speak. She told a story of a small family-owned business, one that had been the heart of a community for generations. A business that had been systematically dismantled by Williams Enterprises' aggressive expansion. "My grandfather built that company from nothing," Sarah said, her voice thick with emotion. "He gave everything he had to it, and in one day, you took it all away." Ethan felt sick. He remembered the deal now, a hostile takeover that had seemed like a smart business move at the time. He had never considered the human cost of his actions. I'm sorry," he said, the words feeling woefully inadequate. "I had no idea." "Save it," Sarah cut him off. "I'm not interested in your apologies, I'm interested in justice." The threat in her words was clear, but Ethan found himself more curious than afraid. "What do you want from me?" he asked. Sarah leaned forward again, her eyes burning with intensity. "I want you to feel what it's like to lose everything, to watch your entire world crumble around you." As they approached her destination, the same apartment building as before, Sarah's phone buzzed. She glanced at it, her expression hardening. "Looks like your day of reckoning is coming sooner than expected, Mr. Williams," she said, her voice cold. She opened the door, but before stepping out, she turned back to Ethan. "You know, for years I've dreamed of this moment, of finally confronting the man who ruined my family. But now that I'm here..." She trailed off, a flicker of uncertainty crossing her face. "What?" Ethan prompted, desperate to understand. Sarah shook her head as if clearing away a troubling thought. "Nothing. Just remember, Ethan, every action has consequences, and yours are about to catch up with you." With that, she was gone, leaving Ethan alone with the weight of his past pressing down on him. As he drove away, his mind whirled with possibilities. Should he go to the police? His lawyers? Or was it time to finally face the music for his years of ruthless business practices? One thing was certain: his life would never be the same again. And as the first rays of dawn began to break over the New York skyline, Ethan Williams realized that his journey of redemption was only just beginning. The sun had barely risen over the Manhattan skyline when Ethan stumbled into his penthouse, his mind reeling from the night's events. He tossed his baseball cap onto the pristine marble countertop, a jarring reminder of the double life he'd briefly inhabited. Without bothering to change out of his rumpled clothes, Ethan made his way to his home office. The space, usually a sanctuary of power and control, now felt suffocating. He sank into his leather chair, fingers flying across the keyboard as he logged into the company's secure database. "Sarah," he muttered, scrolling through countless files. "Who are you really?" As he delved deeper into the archives, a knot formed in the pit of his stomach. Project after project flashed before his eyes, each one a testament to Williams Enterprises' ruthless expansion. How many lives had he carelessly upended in his relentless pursuit of profit? Finally, a name caught his eye. Hartley Sons, a small but respected family business that Williams Enterprises had acquired 5 years ago. The details of the takeover came flooding back. The hard-nosed negotiations, the aggressive tactics, the eventual dismantling of a company that had stood for generations. Ethan's hands shook as he pulled up more information. The faces of the Hartley family stared back at him from an old news article, and there, standing proudly next to an older man, was a younger Sarah. "Oh God," Ethan whispered, the full weight of his actions crashing down on him. He remembered now. The acquisition had been particularly contentious, with the Hartley patriarch refusing to sell until the very end. Ethan had seen it as a challenge, a game to be won at any cost. He'd never stopped to consider the human toll of his victory. As if on cue, his phone buzzed with a news alert. Ethan's blood ran cold as he read the headline: "Williams Enterprises under federal investigation for alleged corporate misconduct." The article mentioned anonymous whistleblowers and hinted at years of ethical violations. Ethan's mind raced. Was this Sarah's doing? How much did she know, and how far was she willing to go for her revenge? His phone exploded with notifications. Frantic messages from his legal team, demands for statements from the press, panicked emails from shareholders. The empire he'd built so carefully was already beginning to crumble. Ethan stood abruptly, pacing the length of his office. He was faced with an impossible choice: fight the allegations with every resource at his disposal, or, what, come clean? Admit to years of cutthroat business practices and questionable ethics? The thought of losing everything he'd worked for was terrifying. But as he caught his reflection in the window, haggard, haunted, a far cry from the confident CEO the world knew, Ethan realized that he'd already lost the things that truly mattered. His daughter's words echoed in his mind. "I can't do this anymore." How long had he been pushing away the people he loved, justifying it as the cost of success? With trembling hands, Ethan picked up his phone and dialed a number he knew by heart, but hadn't used in months. "Emma," he said when the call connected, his voice cracking. "I know I'm probably the last person you want to hear from right now, but I need your help. I've made some terrible mistakes and I don't know how to fix them." There was a long pause and Ethan's heart sank. Then, barely audible, came his daughter's response. "Dad? What's going on?" As Ethan began to explain, tears streaming down his face, he felt a glimmer of hope. Maybe, just maybe, it wasn't too late to make things right. But even as he spoke with Emma, laying bare years of regret and poor choices, a part of Ethan knew that Sarah's reckoning was still to come. The game of cat and mouse they'd begun in that rideshare was far from over. Hanging up with a promise to meet Emma for coffee, a small step but one that felt monumental, Ethan turned back to his computer. If he was going to face the storm that was coming, he needed to know exactly what he was up against. As he dug deeper into the company's files, uncovering layers of questionable deals and ethical breaches, Ethan realized that Sarah had given him an unexpected gift. For the first time in years, he was seeing his life's work with clear eyes, and he didn't like what he saw. The sun climbed higher in the sky, casting long shadows across the city Ethan had once felt he owned. Now, standing at the precipice of losing it all, he found himself wondering if that would really be such a bad thing. With a deep breath, Ethan picked up his phone once more. It was time to face the music. But first he had a rideshare to catch, and a mysterious passenger to confront. As he stepped into the elevator, Ethan felt a strange mix of terror and exhilaration. His life was falling apart, yes, but for the first time in years, he felt truly alive. Whatever came next, he would face it head-on, not as Ethan Williams, untouchable CEO, but as a man seeking redemption, one painful truth at a time. The New York City streets were a blur of yellow cabs and hurried pedestrians as Ethan navigated his nondescript sedan through the morning rush hour. His fingers drummed nervously on the steering wheel, eyes darting between the road and the Rideshare app on his phone. He was looking for one passenger in particular, hoping against hope that Sarah would request another ride. As if the universe was answering his unspoken plea, a notification pinged. Sarah's name flashed on the screen, requesting a pickup just a few blocks away. Ethan's heart raced as he accepted the ride, equal parts terrified and eager for this confrontation. He pulled up to the curb outside a bustling coffee shop, immediately spotting Sarah waiting on the sidewalk. Their eyes met through the windshield, and Ethan saw a flicker of surprise cross her face before it hardened into a mask of determination. Well, Sarah said as she slid into the back seat. I didn't expect to see you again so soon, Mr. Williams. Or should I still call you by your alias? Ethan swallowed hard, his rehearsed speech dying on his lips. Sarah, I know who you are now. About your family's company, Hartley Sons. I remember the acquisition and Spare me the corporate apologies. Sarah cut him off, her voice sharp. I'm not interested in your excuses or your guilt. I'm here for justice. As Ethan merged back into traffic, he felt the weight of her gaze boring into him. The silence in the car was suffocating, charged with years of pain and resentment. What do you want from me? Ethan finally asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Sarah leaned forward, her breath warm against his ear. I want you to feel what it's like to lose everything you've built, to watch your empire crumble and know that there's nothing you can do to stop it. A chill ran down Ethan's spine. The federal investigation, that was you, wasn't it? A bitter laugh escaped Sarah's lips. Let's just say I've been busy these past few years gathering evidence, making connections. Your company's misdeeds run deep, Mr. Williams. And now, the world is about to know just how far you were willing to go for profit. Ethan's mind raced. He thought of the questionable deals he'd uncovered in his own investigation, the ethical lines he'd crossed without a second thought. The weight of his choices pressed down on him, threatening to crush him entirely. I was wrong, he said quietly, surprising himself with the admission. What I did to your family, to so many others, it was unforgivable. I see that now. Sarah's expression flickered, a mix of surprise and suspicion crossing her face. Pretty words, Mr. Williams, but actions speak louder. What are you willing to do to make this right? As they drove through the city, Ethan found himself opening up, sharing the realizations he'd had over the past 24 hours. He told Sarah about his estranged daughter, about the emptiness of his success, about the soul-crushing loneliness that had driven him to become a rideshare driver for a night. To his surprise, Sarah listened, her anger slowly giving way to a wary curiosity. You're not what I expected, she admitted as they neared her destination. I've spent years hating you, painting you as this heartless monster. But you're just a man, a flawed, misguided man who lost his way. Ethan felt a glimmer of hope. I want to make things right, Sarah, not just with you and your family, but with everyone I've hurt. I don't know how, but I'm willing to try, whatever it takes. As he pulled up to the curb, Sarah hesitated, her hand on the door handle. I don't know if I can forgive you, she said softly. But maybe there's a way we can work together to expose the truth and make real change. Their eyes met in the rearview mirror, a silent understanding passing between them. This was far from over, but perhaps there was a path forward, a chance for redemption, however difficult and painful it might be. As Sarah stepped out of the car, she turned back one last time. I'll be in touch, Mr. Williams. Don't disappoint me again. Watching her walk away, Ethan felt a strange mix of fear and hope. He knew the road ahead would be treacherous, filled with legal battles, public scrutiny, and the potential loss of everything he'd built. But for the first time in years, he felt like he was on the right path. Pulling away from the curb, Ethan made a decision. It was time to face the music, to own up to his mistakes and try to make amends. He picked up his phone, dialing his company's board of directors. It was time for an emergency meeting and some long overdue confessions. As the phone rang, Ethan took a deep breath. The man who entered that rideshare car last night was gone, replaced by someone determined to right his wrongs, no matter the cost. The game had changed, and Ethan Williams was finally ready to play by a new set of rules. The boardroom of Williams Enterprises, once a symbol of Ethan's power, now felt like a courtroom. The faces of his board members ranged from confused to outright hostile as Ethan stood at the head of the table, his hands shaking slightly as he prepared to speak. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice steadier than he felt, "I've called this emergency meeting because there's something you all need to know. Our company, my actions, have been built on a foundation of lies and unethical practices." A collective gasp filled the room. Ethan pressed on, detailing years of questionable deals, manipulated financials, and disregard for the human cost of their corporate expansion. With each revelation, he could see the shock and anger growing in the eyes of those around him. Just as he was about to reveal the federal investigation, the boardroom doors burst open. A team of FBI agents flooded in, led by a stern-faced woman who locked eyes with Ethan. "Ethan Williams," she announced, her voice cutting through the chaos. "You're under arrest for securities fraud, insider trading, and corporate espionage." As the agents moved to handcuff him, Ethan caught a glimpse of a familiar face in the hallway. Sarah stood there, her expression a mix of triumph and something else. Regret, perhaps? The next few hours passed in a blur of Miranda rights, fingerprinting, and harsh fluorescent lights. Sitting in an interrogation room, Ethan felt a strange sense of relief. The mask he'd worn for so long had finally cracked, leaving him exposed but oddly free. His lawyer arrived, urging him to stay silent, but Ethan waved him off. "I'm done hiding," he said firmly. "I want to cooperate fully." As Ethan began to detail his crimes, he noticed the FBI agents exchanging puzzled glances. Their confusion became clear when the lead agent, Agent Carter, interrupted him. "Mr. Williams," she said, her brow furrowed, "while your confessions are illuminating, they don't match the evidence we've gathered." Ethan blinked, confused. "What do you mean?" Agent Carter pulled out a file, spreading photos across the table. "We've been investigating your company for months, Mr. Williams, but not for the reasons you think. We believe you've been the victim of an elaborate corporate sabotage scheme." The room seemed to tilt as Ethan processed her words. "I don't understand," he stammered. "The unethical practices, the manipulated financials, were all fabricated," Agent Carter finished. "Expertly done, I might add. Someone has gone to great lengths to make you believe you were guilty of these crimes." Ethan's mind raced. Could it be true? Had he been so consumed by guilt and self-loathing that he'd believed the worst about himself and his company? As if reading his thoughts, Agent Carter leaned forward. "Mr. Williams, we need to know everything about your interactions with Sarah Hartley. We believe she's at the center of this conspiracy." The mention of Sarah's name sent a jolt through Ethan. He thought of their conversations, the pain in her eyes, the determination in her voice. Had it all been an act? With a heavy heart, Ethan began to recount his encounters with Sarah, from that first fateful rideshare to their last conversation. As he spoke, he could see the pieces falling into place for the FBI agents. "It seems Ms. Hartley has been playing a long game," Agent Carter mused, "using your guilt over the acquisition of her family's company to manipulate you into believing you were capable of far worse." Ethan felt a mix of relief and betrayal wash over him. He was innocent of the worst crimes, yes, but the revelation of Sarah's deception cut deep. He had begun to believe in the possibility of redemption, of making amends. Now he wasn't sure what to believe. As the interrogation wound down, Ethan was released with a warning to stay in town and a promise of further questioning. Stepping out of the FBI building, he blinked in the harsh sunlight, feeling as if he'd aged years in a single day. His phone buzzed, a text from an unknown number. Not everything was a lie. Meet me where it all began. Ethan stared at the message, his finger hovering over the delete button. Part of him wanted to walk away to wash his hands of this whole mess. But a larger part, the part that had driven him to become a rideshare driver that fateful night, needed answers. With a deep breath, Ethan hailed a cab. As he slid into the back seat, he couldn't help but appreciate the irony. "Where to?" the driver asked. Ethan gave the address of the spot where he'd first picked up Sarah, his heart racing with a mix of fear and anticipation. He didn't know what awaited him, but he knew this was far from over. The game had changed once again, and Ethan was determined to see it through to the end, whatever the cost. The New York City twilight cast long shadows across the street as Ethan stood at the exact spot where he had first picked up Sarah as a rideshare driver. The bustling city seemed to fade into the background, leaving him alone with his tumultuous thoughts. As he waited, Ethan's mind raced through everything that had transpired. The guilt that had consumed him, the brief hope for redemption, and now the bitter taste of betrayal. It all swirled together in a dizzying cocktail of emotion. "I wasn't sure you'd come." The voice startled him. Sarah emerged from the shadows, her face a mask of conflicting emotions. Gone was the vengeful determination he'd seen before. Now, she looked tired, human. "I almost didn't," Ethan replied, his voice hoarse. "Why, Sarah, why go to all this trouble? The fake evidence, the manipulation, was it all just for revenge?" Sarah's eyes flashed with a mixture of pain and defiance. "It wasn't just about revenge, Ethan. It was about justice, about exposing the truth of what companies like yours do to people like my family." "But the FBI said—" "The FBI doesn't know everything," Sarah cut him off. "Yes, I fabricated some of the evidence I needed to get your attention, to make you feel what it's like to lose everything. But the core of it, the unethical practices, the lives ruined, that was all real." Ethan felt his world tilting again. "I don't understand. If you had real evidence, why not just turn it over to the authorities?" Sarah laughed bitterly. "Because the system is rigged, Ethan. Men like you, companies like yours, you have armies of lawyers to bury the truth. I needed you to admit it yourself, to feel the weight of your actions." As they talked, walking aimlessly through the darkening streets, Sarah revealed the full extent of her plan. She had spent years gathering evidence, not just against Williams Enterprises, but against dozens of corporations that had engaged in similar practices. The fabricated evidence against Ethan was meant to be a trigger, to push him towards a public confession that would blow the lid off a much larger conspiracy. But something changed, didn't it? Ethan asked softly, remembering the moments of genuine connection they'd shared. Sarah's step faltered. I didn't expect you to be so willing to admit your mistakes, to actually want to change. It complicated things. They found themselves in a small park, the city lights twinkling around them like earthbound stars. Sitting on a bench, Ethan felt the weight of years of misdeeds pressing down on him. "So where does this leave us?" he asked. "You've exposed me, shaken my faith in everything I've built, but the truth is still buried." Sarah turned to face him, her eyes shining with unshed tears. "That's up to you, Ethan. I can release everything I have. The real evidence, the testimonies from people your company has hurt. It would destroy Williams Enterprises, or, Ethan prompted, his heart racing. Or we can work together. Use your position, your influence to make real change. To set right the wrongs that have been done not just by your company, but by the entire system." The choice hung in the air between them, heavy with possibility and danger. Ethan thought of his daughter, of the man he'd become, of the legacy he wanted to leave behind. "It won't be easy," he said slowly. "I'll be fighting against everything I've built, everyone I've worked with. I could lose it all." Sarah's hand found his in the darkness. "Or you could gain something far more valuable, a chance at real redemption." As the night deepened around them, Ethan made his decision. He squeezed Sarah's hand, a silent agreement passing between them. The path ahead was uncertain, fraught with legal battles and public scrutiny. But for the first time in years, Ethan felt a sense of purpose that went beyond profit margins and stock prices. "All right," he said, his voice steady. "Let's do this, let's change things." As they stood to leave, ready to face whatever came next, Ethan couldn't help but marvel at the twists of fate that had brought him to this moment. From a lonely CEO playing at being a rideshare driver to a man on the brink of exposing corporate corruption on a massive scale, it was a journey he never could have imagined. But as he walked beside Sarah, no longer enemies but unlikely allies, Ethan realized that sometimes the most extraordinary changes come from the most unexpected places. The game wasn't over. It was only just beginning. The following weeks were a whirlwind of clandestine meetings, late-night strategy sessions, and mounting tension. Ethan and Sarah had formed an uneasy alliance, working tirelessly to compile evidence and build a case that would shake the corporate world to its core. Ethan's penthouse, once a symbol of his isolation, had become their war room. Whiteboards covered in flowcharts and timelines lined the walls, while stacks of documents and laptops cluttered every surface. The view of the New York skyline, which had once filled Ethan with pride, now served as a constant reminder of the power structures they were trying to dismantle. "We're almost ready," Sarah said one evening, her voice tired but determined. She looked up from her laptop, eyes bloodshot from hours of poring over financial records. "Once we release this, there's no going back. Are you sure you're prepared for the fallout?" Ethan nodded, feeling the weight of the decision pressing down on him. "I've spent my whole life building this company, but if tearing it down is what it takes to make things right, then so be it." Just then, Ethan's phone buzzed. The caller ID made his heart skip a beat. "Emma, daughter." With a nervous glance at Sarah, he answered, "Dad?" Emma's voice was hesitant, but there was a warmth there that had been missing for years. "I've been thinking about our coffee meeting, about everything you said. I think I'm ready to talk more, to try and rebuild our relationship." Ethan felt a lump form in his throat. "Emma, that's wonderful. I've missed you so much." As he ended the call, promising to meet Emma for dinner the next night, Ethan caught Sarah watching him, her expression unreadable. "Your daughter?" she asked softly. Ethan nodded, a mix of joy and anguish washing over him. "She wants to reconnect. After all this time, I might have a chance to make things right with her." Sarah's face fell. "Ethan, you know what this means, don't you? Once we release this information, once the investigation goes public, you'll lose everything. Your company, your reputation, even this reconciliation with Emma might be at risk." The reality of the situation hit Ethan like a physical blow. He sank into a nearby chair, his mind reeling. On one hand, he had the chance to expose years of corporate corruption, to bring justice to countless people who had been wronged. On the other, he could rebuild his relationship with his daughter, to reclaim the personal connections he'd sacrificed in his pursuit of success. "What am I supposed to do?" he whispered, more to himself than to Sarah. "How can I choose between doing what's right for the world and what's right for my family?" Sarah knelt beside him, her eyes filled with a mix of compassion and fierce determination. "I can't make this choice for you, Ethan, but remember why we started this. Think of all the families that have been torn apart by corporate greed, all the lives that have been ruined. Your story with Emma, it's just one of thousands." Ethan stood abruptly, pacing the length of the room. His gaze fell on a framed photo of himself and Emma from years ago, both smiling, unburdened by the years of pain and distance that would follow. Then he looked at the whiteboards, at the evidence of wrongdoing that stretched far beyond his own company. "If we do this," he said slowly, "if we expose everything, what guarantee do we have that it will actually change anything? That it won't just be buried by armies of lawyers and PR teams?" Sarah's expression hardened. "No guarantees, but it's a chance, Ethan. A chance to break the cycle, to show that no one is above the law, not even men like you." As the night deepened outside, Ethan found himself at a crossroads. The path of personal redemption lay before him, the chance to heal the wounds with his daughter and find some measure of peace. But alongside it was a steeper, more treacherous path, one that might bring about real change, but at the cost of everything he held dear. "I need some air," Ethan said abruptly, grabbing his jacket. I need to think." As he stepped into the elevator, Sarah called after him. "Ethan, whatever you decide, just know that you're not the same man who picked me up in that rideshare. You've already changed." The doors closed, leaving Ethan alone with the weight of his choice. As the elevator descended, he felt as though he was plummeting into an uncertain future. By the time he reached the ground floor, he knew that the decision he made would define not just his own life, but potentially the lives of countless others. Stepping out into the cool night air, Ethan Williams began to walk, his mind churning with the impossible choice before him. The city bustled around him, oblivious to the battle raging within one man's soul, a battle that could reshape the very foundations of corporate America. The New York City streets were a blur of neon and shadow as Ethan walked aimlessly, his mind a tempest of conflicting emotions. The weight of his decision pressed down on him with each step. The faces of those he'd wronged, including his own daughter, flashing before his eyes. As dawn broke over the city skyline, Ethan found himself in Central Park, the early morning joggers and dog walkers paying no attention to the disheveled man on the park bench. He pulled out his phone, staring at the lock screen, a photo of Emma from years ago, her smile carefree and loving. With trembling fingers, he dialed her number. "Dad?" Emma's voice was groggy with sleep. "Is everything okay?" Ethan took a deep breath. "Emma, I need to tell you something. Something that might change everything between us." Over the next hour, Ethan poured out his heart to his daughter. He told her about Sarah, about the evidence they'd gathered, about the corruption that ran deep in the corporate world he'd been a part of for so long. He confessed his own culpability, his years of turning a blind eye to the human cost of his success. When he finished, the silence on the other end of the line was deafening. "Emma," he said softly, his heart racing. "I'm still here, Dad," she replied, her voice thick with emotion. I don't know what to say. Part of me is horrified, but part of me, I'm proud of you for wanting to make this right." Ethan felt tears welling up in his eyes. "Even if it means losing everything? My company, my reputation, maybe even you?" "Dad," Emma said firmly, "you won't lose me, not again. Whatever you decide to do, I'll be here. It's time we both stood for something bigger than ourselves." As the call ended, Ethan felt a weight lift from his shoulders. He stood, a new determination in his step, and headed back to his penthouse. Sarah was waiting for him, dark circles under her eyes suggesting she hadn't slept. "Ethan," she began, but he held up a hand to stop her. "I've made my decision," he said, his voice steady. "We're going to release everything, all of it, but we're going to do it my way." Over the next few days, Ethan set his plan in motion. He called an emergency board meeting not just for Williams Enterprises, but for the CEOs of a dozen other major corporations implicated in their investigation. The day of the meeting arrived, and Ethan stood before a room full of the most powerful people in the business world, their faces a mix of confusion and annoyance. "Gentlemen, ladies," Ethan began, his heart pounding but his voice unwavering. "I've called you here today because we stand at a crossroads. For too long, we've put profit above people, growth above ethics. Today, that changes." With a nod to Sarah, who stood at the back of the room, screens around the boardroom lit up with damning evidence. Emails, financial records, testimonies from those whose lives had been ruined by corporate greed. "We have a choice," Ethan continued as shocked murmurs filled the room. "We can fight this, bury it in lawsuits and PR campaigns. Or we can take responsibility. We can be the change that our world so desperately needs." What followed was hours of heated debate, threats of legal action, and moments of deep soul-searching. But as the sun set over New York City, something extraordinary happened. One by one, the CEOs in that room began to agree with Ethan. In a joint press conference that would go down in history, Ethan stood alongside his former rivals and colleagues. Together, they announced a massive overhaul of corporate practices, billions in restitution for those harmed by their actions, and a commitment to a new era of ethical business. The fallout was immense. Stock prices plummeted, investigations were launched, and the business world was turned upside down. Ethan resigned from his position, handing control of Williams Enterprises to a board of ethics specialists and community leaders. Months later, as the dust began to settle, Ethan sat in a small cafe waiting nervously. The bell above the door chimed, and he looked up to see Emma walking in, a tentative smile on her face. "Hi, Dad," she said, sliding into the seat across from him. "Hi, sweetheart," he replied, his voice thick with emotion. As they began to talk, rebuilding the bond that had been broken for so long, Ethan caught sight of Sarah through the window. She gave him a small nod, a look of pride and gratitude on her face, before disappearing into the crowd. Ethan turned back to his daughter, feeling for the first time in years that he was exactly where he needed to be. The road ahead would be challenging, but he was ready to face it, not as a CEO, but as a man committed to making a difference, one day at a time. As he listened to Emma talk about her life, her dreams, Ethan realized that he had gained something far more valuable than any corporate success. He had found his way back to what truly mattered: family, integrity, and the courage to stand up for what's right. The game had changed, and Ethan Williams had changed with it. His journey of redemption was far from over, but for the first time in years, he felt truly alive, truly purposeful. And that, he realized, was the greatest success of all.
Thank you very much for listening to this story. Comment below what you thought of the ending and from which city you're listening to us. If you enjoyed this story and want to hear more, click on the next story that's appearing on your screen now. Leave your like and subscribe to our channel so we can build a huge community that shares inspiring stories together. See you soon.